Hello guys, in this video we will be talking about interference or influence of first language when learning a second language. But what is it? In second language acquisition, L1 interference, also known as negative transfer, refers to the influence of the first language on the learning of a second language. Originally, it was referred as just transfer during the 50s and 60s, but it was later modified to place a more emphasis on its negative effects rather than its positive effects, as it generally believed that only negative transfer possesses challenges in teaching and learning. Now we're moving on to some important concepts. Transfer. Transfer broadly refers to the influence of a learning native language. Based on this, using similar or different language patterns will lead to either a positive or negative transfer. But what's the difference? When the influence of native language leads to immediate or rapid acquisition or the use of target language, we speak of positive transfer or facilitation. This makes the learning process smoother and more efficient. Here's an example. For instance, if someone speaks Spanish as their first language and is learning English as a second language, they might find it easier to learn English words that are similar to Spanish words due to shared Latin roots. Words like communication, animal, or university have similar forms and meanings in both languages, making it easier for Spanish speakers to remember them in English. Negative transfer occurs where the influence of native language leads to errors in the acquisition or use of target language. This is also known as interference. This interference can affect various aspects of language learning, including phonology, morphology, syntax, and pragmatics. Here are two different examples focusing in phonology and syntax. The first one is V sound and B sound. Spanish do not distinguish between the English V and B sounds. So Spanish speakers may pronounce base and bass identically as bass. It also happens with syntax and tricky translations. In Spanish, the word embarazada means pregnant. However, if a Spanish speaker directly translates this word into English, they might mistakenly say embarrassed instead of pregnant because embarazada sounds similar to embarrassed in English.
Now we have interlanguage. Interlanguage refers to the knowledge of the L1 in the speaker's mind as the L1 does, but this L2 interlanguage exists in the same mind as the L1 does. The information in grammar forms from the first language that the learners have are stored, and they know how to use them in that language, that is their L1. However, when the learners start to learn another language, they need to add new structures to their interlanguage to develop L2 that they are learning. This creates a mix of the two languages, rules, and grammars that guide them through the process called transfer. Moving to fossilization, the process of learning a second language is characteristically non-linear and fragmentary, marked by a mixed landscape of rapid progressions in certain areas but slow movement, incubation, or even permanent stagnation in others. Such a process results in a linguistic system known as interlanguage. In short words, fossilization means when incorrect language starts to become a habit and it is difficult to correct those mistakes. These kinds of mistakes usually occur when we are acquiring a language. It happens because these errors could be a result of the L1 to the L2. The difference between these two languages could be the main reason for fossilization. Also, the transfer of different rules from the L1 could lead to fossilization. This is why transfer has both a positive and a negative side. Some examples of fossilization. When the Spanish speaker that is learning English says a cat big instead of a big cat, this could happen because in Spanish will be un gato grande, and they use the transfer that they have from Spanish, making a fossilization of these mistakes without being aware of it. Another example could be when the English learner says I don't have nothing in my notebook instead of saying I don't have anything in my notebook, the same as the example number 1. This could be because they are using rules of Spanish instead of using the English rules. In this case, they are using double negatives. Lastly, overgeneralization happens when learners apply rules from their native language to the target language in situations where those rules do not apply. In Spanish, adjectives typically come after the noun. Example, casa grande for big house. Someone learning English would say house big instead of big house. Overgeneralization also occurs when learners learn a new rule of the target language. For example, overgeneralizing regular verbs, conjugation patterns to irregular verbs. Incorrect, go instead of went. Incorrect, breaked instead of broke.
Input hypothesis. Language acquisition occurs when learners are exposed to language input that is slightly beyond their current levels of fluency, which classify terms as input plus 1. This means that the input should be comprehensible to the learners but also contain some new linguistic elements that allows for the language development. Affectivity filter hypothesis. It proposed that a number of affective variables such as motivation, self-confidence, anxiety, and stress can act as a filter that either facilitates or hinders language acquisition. When the filter is low, they are more likely to take and process the input accurately. On the other hand, when the filter is high, it will be more difficult for the input to cross that filter. Mnemonic hypothesis. Learners acquire grammatical structures in a natural order, but conscious language rules are not developed until later. Once a student has a conscious knowledge on grammatic structures, they are able to edit or set monitor oral and writing language. This process requires adequate time to development. The interaction hypothesis allows two major claims about the role of interaction in L2 acquisition. Comprehensive input is necessary for an L2 acquisition. Modifications to the interaction structures of conversations will take place in the process of negotiation of conversation. Problem: to make input comprehensible to an L2 learner. This hypothesis is known as the social constructivist model because it explains how we learn by being in social interactions with other learners. It shows the importance of interplay of the students and learners, including the people that they interact while learning an L2. It is important because it brings explicit and implicit feedback to the learner. The implicit feedback is most given by a teacher, while the implicit feedback could be given by the persons they interact. The conclusion of mentioned law was that the interaction and conversation between native speakers and non-native speakers make a significant improvement in learning compared to the interaction exclusively among non-native speakers. Face-to-face interaction and accuracy form are the key factor to learn. He made a distinction between these two concepts. Implicit knowledge. Learners perceive without demanding on central attention resource, meaning that is unconscious, intuitive process of understanding language rules and patterns. This allows the individuals to use the language automatically. With unconscious effort, learners remain unaware of the information learned. As a result, learners cannot verbalize what they have learned. Explicit knowledge. Learners perceive by making demands on central attention results. It is an unconscious process typically developed through formal instruction, such as classes. Learners are aware that they have learned something and can verbalize what they have learned. Interlanguage refers to the systematic knowledge of language, which is independent of both the learner's native language and the second language. That is to say, it is a combination of the two that the learners develop as they process through the learning of their second language. The term in the language was first introduced by Slinker, who referred to it as L2 systematic knowledge, independent of both L1 and L2. It is a type of language which can be produced by FL, L2 learners, who are in the process of acquiring or learning a new language. Finally, Gass and Slinker believe that there are two types of transfer in a second language, positive and negative. Positive transfer facilitates the process of a second language acquisition, while negative transfers indicate the negative impacts of L1 on L2, which interferes with and constrains the learning of an L2.
Practical implications when teaching a second language or foreign language. Here are things to consider when teaching it in classroom. Awareness. Teachers should be aware of the similarities and differences between the learner's L1 and the target L2. Understanding the potential areas of interference can help teachers anticipate difficulties and tailor their instruction accordingly. Error correction. When correcting errors, teachers should consider whether they are the result of L1 interference. Providing feedback that highlights the differences between the two languages can help learners correct these errors more effectively. Language comparison. Explicitly comparing and contrasting the structures and rules of the L1 and L2 can help learners understand the differences and similarities between the two languages. This can help enhance their awareness of potential interference patterns. The use of L1. While it's often recommended to use the target language as much as possible in the classroom, judicious use of the L1 can sometimes be beneficial, especially for explaining complex concepts or clarifying differences between the two languages. Cultural context. Consider the cultural context of both languages when teaching. Cultural differences can also affect language use and understanding, so teaching cultural aspects alongside language can help mitigate interference. Individual learner differences. Recognize that not all learners will experience the same types or levels of interference. Factors such as proficiency level, language background, and language learning strategies can all influence the extent of L1 interference.